Hello everyone and welcome. Let me introduce you our first speaker, our former IPSF president, Ms. Tana Uligi, who works as a technical officer at World Health Organization, and she will be talking to us on the topic of health workforce, which is currently a very active topic in global health efforts, as well as her role at the organization. Once more, short note for participants, as Luca said, don't forget that after the lecture you will have the chance to post the questions, and do not forget to send organizers only. And now I will give the presenting role to you, Ms. Uligi, and you can see note to share your screen.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dalia, and thank you, Luca. It is such a pleasure to be here with you all today, and I look forward to making this as interactive as possible, and happy to answer any questions that you may have. So as Dalia mentioned, I was very, very fortunate to have the opportunity to enter into global health through the IPSF. While I was at pharmacy school in New Zealand, we actually joined IPSF for the first time. And it was this whole new world that I was exposed to with such interesting collaboration, opportunities to do joint work, and also opportunities to do joint studies at that time on pharmacy education. So as we were joining IPSF from New Zealand, I also became very connected and much more aware of global health issues. So I have a lot to thank IPSF for that. And it's absolutely wonderful to see how strong IPSF continues to be and is getting stronger every year. So I'm really excited to support that and also to be here with you this evening. So a little bit about myself. I have here on the screen just a brief timeline of my journey in global health, beginning with pharmacy school, getting involved as the IPSF president, and then that leading to work in the FIP. One of the questions that Luca asked me to look at was my interest, how I became interested and active in the career path that I've chosen. I think the work that I was doing in IPSF at the time, which was very much in the beginning, before I became president, looking at education, I was quite fascinated with workforce education issues already at that time. In my IPSF year, we did a lot of work in that space and really started to challenge the International Foundation. The late CEO and General Secretary, Mr. Ton Hook, challenged me as I was wrapping up my presidency when I pushed him on this, and he said, "What would you do? I give you 6 months." So from this sort of advocacy and being a bit of a nuisance in FIP's side, it led to a whole another area of work around forming and expanding FIP's work through the Pharmacy Education Task Force, and also in establishing a portfolio of work on health workforce. So I just turning the webcam on. Okay, so that led to some really interesting work that I was doing with FIP. We started to work with other UN agencies, forming relationships that the FIP didn't have, for example, with UNESCO, and also building relationships with the WHO Health Workforce Department. We worked together with other health professions on workforce education challenges, and within FIP really strengthened the connection with different countries on what the pharmacy education workforce issues are. And it's also fantastic to see now how robust and active the workforce education portfolio is, and FIP is probably one of the strongest. So it was wonderful to be at the beginning, of that journey back in 2005 through to 2009. While I was at FIP, I was lucky to be able to do my PhD at the University of London, which is now UCL. I understand one of the speakers yesterday, Andrea Bruno, also did her PhD at UCL, and in fact we were both there around the same time. And this exposed me to the science behind the work that I was doing, And it also allowed me to build my research skills, and these are skills that I took into my work after FIP as an international consultant. So up until then, a lot of my work was focused on pharmacy education and workforce, but when I started consulting, I became interested in broader global health issues and worked on broader health workforce issues. So everything from community health workers to how to improve effectiveness and efficiency of training health workers of all different types, regulation of health workers, the performance and productivity of different types of health workers, how you can do more with limited resources in low and middle income countries, workforce development in fragile states, post-conflict states. So a very fascinating time. And then from the consultancy work, I was asked to lead the research and implementation, science, policy portfolio on health workforce in a US Agency for International Development project. You can see on the screen it has a very long name, and the project, one project evolved into another project. But basically, this project was working in 30-odd low and middle income countries. So I was able to bring all that I'd learned through the pharmacy experience, through the research experience, and apply that to low and middle income settings. So that was great. And I also again was able to do a year-long sort of program through the Institute for Healthcare Improvement on quality improvement, which was great for my understanding of looking at the science behind improving quality of care and how the health workforce could contribute to that. And so this really broadened my understanding of implementation science and how to really improve as you go and collect evidence as part of the work. From that experience, I joined WHO, initially actually on Ebola. So I was very passionate about health workforce. I think the Ebola outbreak of 2014-15 shocked the world in many ways. And we could see how the lesson of weak health systems, critical health workforce shortages has such a huge impact, not just on the health status of populations, in those countries, but all around the world, and how it had a massive impact on the economies and livelihoods of countries, not limited to those 3 countries, but all around the world again. So it was fantastic to work in this space, to work especially focused on the 3 countries, looking at their workforce situation, how we could immediately support health workers, protect them, build the workforce rapidly, and also in the medium to long term, coordinating with different donors and partners to strengthen the workforce and build this more resilient health system where such an outbreak is less likely to happen. And that work was quite important in informing a broader piece of work, which I was able to do last year, which I'll speak more about. This is now my day job, a big part of my day job. And we had the adoption of the Sustainable Development Agenda, the 2030 Agenda. And last year, the UN Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon at the time, formed a number of new commissions, and these commissions were set up to look at how to accelerate gains towards the SDGs and bringing different actors together across sectors to find innovative solutions to challenges. And this commission was focused on health workforce, and it brought together the WHO, the International Labour Organization, which is the UN agency focusing on labor and work, and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or the OECD, to look at how to address the growing shortfall of health workers and to look at the gains for the broader society and the economy by investing in health workforce, knowing that this area has been chronically underinvested in for decades, and the shortfalls that we thought were quite bad, 10 years ago, are even worse now and are projected to be worse still by 2030. So how we can avoid this crisis situation from deepening, and how we can see it as an investment opportunity for all kinds of SDG gains. And I'll get into that more later on. Now I'm still with the World Health Organization, and we're picking up from the work of the Commission to see how we can radically change the way we invest in health workforce, including the pharmacy workforce. And I would say that, you know, the work that I'm doing now is very much informed by my past work. So that's a little bit about my history and how I became interested. My typical day is quite varied, I would say, but on average, I spend a lot of time, you know, usually every day I spend time talking to a member state, which is a government constituent. So either the missions, which are based in Geneva, that have relationships with the different UN agencies, talking to them about their concerns of their governments on health workforce issues, how we could work together and collaborate. There's also a lot of technical work, so work related to data, new evidence, and there's also a lot of my work, because we're trying to break new ground, is about innovation, both in ideas and also in relationships. So trying to bring different groups into this picture to work with us on tackling this and finding new ways of doing things. And also a lot of my time spent with different groups, advising them on what they're trying to do, how they could do it better, how they could work with us. And then a lot of WHO's role is to convene experts and partners to work together on joint products. So, you know, last week we had a meeting of experts on health workforce data, for example, to try and work together on some new ideas. So a lot of technical aspects. I also spend a lot of time communicating. So what good is all this evidence and science if we're not able to communicate it to different partners? So social media is really critical, different articles that we're working on, outreach such as this and other conferences and webinars we're quite engaged in. So what have I learned from all of this? Okay, I would say for any budding, you know, students trying to find their feet and think about their role and opportunities in science, sort of have some 5 major lessons, I would say. First of all, follow your inspiration. Forget about what anybody else does. What makes you tick? What are you fascinated about? What are you interested in? What ignites your imagination, and follow it. It doesn't matter if nobody else is working on it or there's no clear path. You will figure it out. And I think inspiration is powerful because it's a kind of it allows you to be inquisitive, to explore new things, to have that curiosity and approach issues in very different ways. And so I think that's fundamental. It's not good enough to pick a path or to do a PhD or to do further study just because it's there. You have to really love it and want it and be fascinated by it. And I think that's essential to any career or path in science. Secondly, be bold, brave, and audacious. Bold, do things that others haven't done. Don't be afraid of that. Brave, sometimes you're going to have to withstand a lot of challenges and you're going to come across roadblocks. And it's easy to get disheartened or concerned. But you know, find your community and network and so on, because you have to overcome those. Because whatever challenges you're facing now, there are going to be bigger challenges in the future. So think of it as your training ground to be more equipped to take on bigger challenges in the future. So don't let it get you down. Use it as a way of getting stronger and braver as you go. Audacious, sometimes, you know, I talk to students and other colleagues even, not just students, who say, well, how could I possibly say that? You know, there's a very senior person over there. So break the mold. You'd be surprised how far a good idea can carry. So just because you're not hearing it from somewhere else, or, you know, don't think you're too junior or too young or any of that, we put limitations on ourselves that aren't always real. So just put it out there anyway and see what happens. Third, embrace every opportunity to learn and create new evidence. So sometimes we can be quite picky about opportunities, but I think sometimes we need to take every opportunity we can and to be creative about those opportunities. So sometimes the opportunity doesn't look very exciting or interesting, but think about what you're trying to develop within yourself, that toolbox of skills and experience you can pull on in the future, and go for it with the view of building your own capacities to do that. You know, I've been fortunate to come across a number of opportunities, but also create opportunities for myself to really learn. So even if it wasn't on a topic that I was necessarily, you know, that passionate about, I could, you know, challenge myself to think how I could use that to learn a skill or to build an experience that would help me in what I was passionate about. And I think we have to create new evidence along the way. So it's not just for, you know, fully fledged scientists to create new evidence. I think it's up to all of us to do that, and it's such a rich ground. So it's definitely worth building that skill to document, to evaluate, to be critical, and to generate that evidence and not be wedded to whatever you've created. I think we should be wedded to the passion and the outcome you're trying to achieve, but not necessarily wedded to a method of doing it. We should be just as ready as scientists to abandon something we have been, you know, created as our baby in order to pick up something more effective, more efficient, and so on. And in that way, we're going to be much more catalytic, much more dynamic in what we're trying to achieve. 4, build your social capital. What do I mean by social capital? So capital in economic terms is, you know, the money, the assets you have to do different things, invest in order to grow your business and so on. The social capital is your social networks, you know, and your professional networks that allow you to achieve what you're trying to do. So much of today's challenges have to do with interactions between people. So being part of IPSF already is a huge boost to your social capital. Keep building it. You know, when I was in IPSF as president, I started to attend these big international events. I used to get quite daunted approaching, you know, bigwigs or people that I didn't really know, and I used to challenge myself in every coffee break that I had to meet, you know, a handful of people that I didn't know. So just and it's surprising where those contacts can take you. They can be mentors, they can be collaborators, you know, other people who are working on evidence that might be interesting to what you're trying to achieve. And the world is ultimately a small place, so I think it's really important to prioritize this networking. Finally, create your own path, opportunities and jobs. So I've shared with you so far the path that I've taken. That doesn't mean that that's the path you should take. And just because there's no job for what you want to do doesn't mean that you couldn't create it. I think we're in a very flexible, dynamic time. It's not so rigid as before. We can be entrepreneurs in many different ways. And I think it's up to us to think about how we can you know, move to each step one by one. I certainly, as IPSF president or even as a pharmacy student, have any clue where I was going to be in 10 years' time. But I knew what I wanted to work on, which was global health and policy. And I had probably very little idea how to get there, you know, step by step. But it's figuring it out as you go and being brave to do that. Okay, so what am I working on now? I am looking at how we can achieve a fit-for-purpose health workforce by 2030. What does that mean? So we know that up till now there have been, the world is a changing place. We say change is constant and guaranteed. If we look to 2030 and what we're trying to achieve with the SDGs, which is universal health coverage for health, but we know there are a lot of dynamics we have to take into account: globalization, increasing migration. For example, over the last 10 years, we've had a 50% increase in the mobility of health workers between countries. Over the next decade, we can expect this to really ramp up. So it could be as much as double or triple the current levels of labor mobility. We have rapidly aging populations. Some of you may have seen the Lancet paper modeling life expectancy. You know, there's a 50% chance that life expectancy could go up to over 90 by the time we get to 2030. We have all kinds of different morbidity challenges. We have rising concern of non-communicable diseases, climate change and its impact on health, more and more so populations becoming urbanized. Citizens are having a much greater role in what they're doing and what they want to see as societies, as economies, rapid innovation and technological advances, and also rising costs and inequality. So there are loads of challenges, but within that, a rich field of opportunities too. The Sustainable Development Goals is really radical if you compare to the Millennium Development Goals, particularly for health, because we widen our scope beyond a few disease priorities like maternal health, TB, malaria, HIV, to a broader concept of health and well-being. And also, by having these goals across 17 areas, we can see that the goals are connected. And in many ways, we're not going to be able to achieve the goals unless we connect the dots across different sectors. So this offers new ways of working. Health workforce is interesting and unique because by investing in health workforce, we can actually tackle a number of SDG goals at the same time. And the evidence from the work that we have been doing with other agencies demonstrates this. So you can see highlighted in red which SDGs we can actually tackle by investing in strengthening the health workforce, including the pharmacy workforce. And to take advantage of these opportunities and investments to have the biggest impact, we have to understand what we're calling the health labor market. I think over the last decade, we have been very much focused on numbers of health workers. So how many health workers do we have? Where are they based? Are they distributed in the right places? The labor market means we have to understand it more holistically across sectors. So of course, the health workers we have now had to be trained in higher education, universities, polytechnics, apprenticeships, etc. And those people also had to come through the education sector. One example, for instance, I was doing some work in Namibia a few years ago. They were going to start their first ever pharmacy school, and I went there to help advise on how they could do this strategically. So we looked at how many pharmacists they thought they might need, how the pharmacy school could start, but then we also looked at the education sector, and we found that the secondary school system, the science in that was quite weak. So they would actually struggle to get enough students that had the basic level of science, maths, and other skills to be able to get into pharmacy schools. So by broadening our understanding of all these sectors and how they impact health workforce, it's really important. And then, of course, it's not just how many health workers we have, but are they employed? Are they unemployed? When I was working in Afghanistan, we looked at tracking graduates of pharmacy schools, pharmacists, right after graduation, and we found quite a high percentage of them were unemployed for up to 2 years after graduating. So it's all very well and good graduating more pharmacists from the pharmacy school or expanding the pharmacy school. That's really important. But unless we understand what's happening in employment and how to address the challenges that young people are facing getting into employment in Afghanistan, we wouldn't really be able to solve the problem. And of course, none of that is very helpful unless the health workforce are actually equipped to deliver the health services. So during Ebola, we saw that although they had huge workforce shortages, the health workers that they had were not well equipped at the beginning of the outbreak in terms of protective equipment, protocols, the infrastructure required to be able to contain and prevent the escalation of the outbreak. Last year, we had the adoption of a global strategy on health workforce at the World Health Assembly, and IPSF also gave a statement on this, which was great. And the unique thing about this agenda is that it's a truly global issue. So there is no one country in the world who can comfortably say, we have no health workforce challenges, we're totally fine. And of course, countries don't exist in isolation. We're always depending on, some countries are very dependent on other countries for their health workforce. There's a lot of exchange. We also have increasing health tourism where patients themselves may travel to another country for diagnostics, for certain tests, for certain types of healthcare or interventions or support. So these 4 objectives, strategic objectives of the strategy, are relevant to all countries. You can read more on this link. But one thing we really, if we just zoom out now, what we're really trying to tackle is a new understanding of what workforce we require for 2030 to be fit for purpose. WHO has put forward a threshold density. So this is a level of health workforce which is associated with countries being more able to provide universal health coverage. It's not a target, it's not a minimum, but this level of density is sort of correlated with countries that are able to provide a more comprehensive package of services that we would expect for universal coverage. And that level is 4.45 health workers per 1,000 population. Now, ideally, we would want our supply of health workforce to be sufficient to match this need, right? Like, we would want there to be enough health workers supplied in any country to be able to cater to this basic threshold of need. But the reality in many countries is that there is a deficit. There is not enough health workers coming in to be able to meet that need. Another dimension when you think about is the demand. So this is from an economic concept. This is the economic demand to create the jobs, to employ people to meet the need. So ideally, we would want our demand to be in balance with the need and sufficient with supply. So you don't have huge numbers of vacancies. You have the right positions in the right places to meet population needs. You can guess where I'm going. In many countries, we don't have enough economic demand to meet the need. So let me give you an example. You may be surprised to know that some countries, like Kenya, have had a serious problem of unemployment of health workers. So even though there are huge needs from a population standpoint, the economics are not in place to create the jobs, which means that there are not enough jobs even though there's a huge need. So you have maybe more or growing supply, but there aren't jobs for health workers to go into. Similarly, in Afghanistan, where you have the situation of unemployed pharmacists, especially young pharmacists, you know, the need was there from the population to have more access to medicines, better use of medicines, and so on. The supply was growing, that more graduates were coming out of pharmacy school, but the demand wasn't there to create the jobs that would employ these pharmacists to do what they needed to do. We also have a situation in richer countries where the demand may be much, much higher than the population need. So, for example, in richer countries, you have a more comprehensive package of services, maybe very specialized services that are quite resource intensive, that go beyond a basic level of universal health coverage, so the demand is much higher. And maybe there is not enough supply to meet that demand, and that's what's driving migration, for instance. For example, today I went to the dentist, and the dental hygienist was from Canada, and actually all the dental hygienists that I've spoken to in Geneva are from Canada, and they talked about how, you know, Switzerland is not able to produce enough dental hygienists, so they're recruiting quite actively from Canada. So this is an example where supply doesn't quite match demand. What does that all mean? That's all fine and good. Well, the World Bank projects that by 2030, we're going to have approximately a doubling of demand for health workers. So that means there's going to be the creation of 40 million new jobs, mostly health professionals. And every one health professional job is supported by 1 to 2 other occupations. You know, we have the record keepers, we have supply chain needs, we have administrative IT, etc. Needs, which also, you know, create more jobs, which sounds great, right? But until we look at the breakdown, where is this demand going to happen? This economic demand that's going to create all these jobs. Unfortunately, it's not in the low-income countries. It's mostly in the lower middle, upper middle, high-income countries. So for those countries, it's good news. The economics are going to be in place to create jobs for health workers. Fantastic. Now, if we look at the shortfall, for the richer countries, there's going to be enough economic demand to employ health workers to meet the shortfall, but the shortfall is based on supply. So unless we are able to train more health workers and get them into the labor market, we're not going to be able to take advantage of this massive growth in job creation. And what we're going to likely see is a growing inequity. So, of course, the richer countries have higher capacity to pull health workers from other countries, which will create a higher vulnerability of the countries they're coming from to provide health services. The other danger is that we have, as you can see, a massive shortfall of health workers in low-income countries, and we don't have the economic demand in place to address that. So we really have to look at how we can stimulate demand, how we can invest more in jobs, not just in producing more health workers, but in jobs in low-income countries, if we really want to achieve universal health coverage. So in a nutshell, that's the challenge that the work that I'm doing at WHO is trying to address. This is the title page of the Commission report that I mentioned, and there's a YouTube there that summarizes, and you can't read all 60 plus pages of the report. It's a short, 3-minute YouTube video that you can watch here on what the Commission is saying and what the recommendations are. We've had a lot of progress just in the last few months since the report was launched in September. So you can see here the timeline, and these are the types of things that I've been working towards. And the other thing that was important about the Commission is that it showed how investing in the health workforce can lead to economic growth in 6 different ways. So we often think about how, okay, so if we had a stronger health system, we had enough health workers, we improved the health of populations, and because those people are healthier, they're going to be more productive at work. Right? They're not going to be as ill, they're going to be able to have less time off work, they're going to be able to take on employment opportunities they might not be able to take on, and that leads to economic growth. But there are 5 other pathways by which we can achieve economic growth that we hadn't really thought about before, and we're now exploring and can see that it makes a much stronger case for why investing in health workforce is a good idea. It's not costs that we need to contain, or cut, but really to see how we can optimize and expand. So these are the Commission's recommendations. I won't go into them in detail. You can read more about them. These are the 5 immediate actions that we're now working on. So I am currently responsible for coordination between different agencies, WHO, ILO, OECD. We have a 5-year action plan that actually was just under consultation till last Friday. IPSF actually sent a submission, which is great. And we will be taking this to the World Health Assembly for the member states to discuss. And this will be the first time we have a truly intersectoral, multiple agency plan of how we're going to strengthen the health workforce, which is new and necessary. And we have some really exciting opportunities to do things in radically different ways, so stay tuned on how we're going to do that. I also want to mention, for those interested in the pharmacy side of this, the pharmacy workforce development goals, which were adopted last year in Nanjing. And there are a number of goals. These are fully in alignment with the work that I've been talking about, both the global strategy on health workforce and the high-level commission. And you can see here the different goals and what they mean. I think it's important for students to be aware of this because you're going to be entering the workforce, and it will be important for you to have a say how these actually pan out. And also the strategic side of it in terms of understanding the impact of the workforce, the intelligence in terms of the planning, the data, the evidence, how that feeds into policy is so important to everything else. And there's science and evidence and research to be done in all of these areas. So if you are interested or potentially curious to learn more about workforce and how you can enter that field, I encourage you to have a look at this and think how you might do that. So that's all I have to say on this. I'm happy to take questions from now. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for this interesting lecture. And we have a few questions which our participants wrote down as you were speaking. So let me go to the first question. How do you create the needed balance between work and school? It can be easy to get stressed, depressed, drained, and so on.
Yes, it's not easy. I feel like balance is such a slippery topic. You think that you might, it's like the rainbow, you know, as you get closer to it, it's moving further away. But I think it's really important to look after yourself. There is nothing that's so important that's worth risking your health, including your mental health, over. There just isn't, because you're such an important person in this world, and your ability to do things, you know, your health is critical. So don't go so far as you're completely broken and burnt out. You're no good to anybody or any cause at that point. When I was doing my PhD, I was actually full-time enrolled in my PhD and also full-time working for FIP. So needless to say, this was an incredibly hectic period. I'm not sure I would recommend it. There were pros and cons. I was very, very passionate about what I was doing. So, you know, as I was saying, it's important to be inspired, because I think being inspired brings an energy, a level of energy that you might not otherwise have. You can't manufacture inspiration, you can't manufacture energy. So it's really important you get, you know, you apply yourself to the thing that you really care about and you're passionate about. I think it's important to build in breaks. One thing that I am learning over time and I'm getting better at is to try and have weekends, you know, to myself. I think trying to work continuously all day and night and travel and not take a break is not good for anybody at any age. Maybe it's easy to do when you're younger, but it's not ideal. The other thing I think is important in terms of balance is having that support, both in your personal life and also in your professional life. This is so critical, because I think we're always going to come across challenges along the way, which can really mushroom and become huge obstacles unless we have a peer support, both in our work and our personal life, to be able to handle those. And the other thing I think is important in terms of balance is to learn what to care about and what not to care about. So sometimes you have to say, you know what, I'm just going to do it anyway. So sometimes we spend a lot of time on things that don't actually have a huge impact on the outcome because we're not strategic enough. And we say yes to everything, but it's important to say no to things that you need to say no to as well, in order to conserve your time and energy on things that are more important. Don't give up on all your passions. So, you know, one of the things when I was a pharmacy student, and also as a young pharmacist, I was very passionate about music. I was actually a music teacher at the same time. That's how I supported myself through pharmacy school. And when I picked up IPSF and global health, I gave all of that up. And I regret that now. I wish that I had continued with it, because I think it would have helped me to create a level of, you know, improved balance, and that I think would have made me stronger. So don't give up the things that you like or enjoy or you're passionate about. These things can really help you as well.
Thank you very much for your answer. And we have one special request. His question: could you please go to your first slide, because I joined late, so I couldn't write at all. So
okay.
Thank you. And a second question, how do you think it will be future of health workforce? Let's say by the time we achieve SDH in 2030, what would be your advice to our generation still in school to capitalize on the future and get the most out of it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think if we imagine ourselves that we're suddenly in 2030, what does the health workforce look like? How will the health workforce work? We know that, just for context, there's a lot of work looking at the future of work and what the implications of these technological advances will be. And it's really clear that in many sectors there are going to be heavy job losses. Massive automation technology will make existing jobs redundant, but health and social sector is quite unique in that we're expecting continued growth over that time, so it's quite a secure area to have a career, but we need to be willing to adapt and be flexible. So that means not being too wedded to particular ways of doing things, being willing to take the responsibility of continuously learning. The pace of development in science, in both service delivery and in the science around health and preventative health, is advancing so rapidly and quickly that whatever you're learning now in pharmacy school is probably going to be mostly redundant by the time we get to 2030. So bearing that in mind and seeing that a core part of what you need to maintain going forward is this ability to adapt, to continuously learn, to advance yourself. and also to work in very different models. I was talking with a colleague just today about how, in some countries they don't have necessarily the specialists to read results or diagnostics, but they're actually working with colleagues in other countries to achieve that. So our whole sense of healthcare team it's not only about transcending different types of health workers that have to work together, but you might not necessarily physically be in the same place. We also have to be prepared for the fact that patients and populations are going to take much more responsibility for their own care and require different types of support from their health workers. So right now, we're talking about patient empowerment, engagement. We're going to go into the next level where it's the perhaps patient driving what they need and the health workers supporting them to do that. Whatever an algorithm can do, you don't need to do. So focusing your energies on roles that bring value to the population is really challenging, because I think, in pharmacy we're very wedded to the things that traditionally, up until now, we've been recognized for. So challenging you as young pharmacists, the next generation of the profession, to think in very radically different ways, and not necessarily more of the same or more of the old, but really going to that next step, that next level that will make a difference. And that means that you will continue to have an important role to serve in society. And then finally, I think that what we're going to see by 2030 is a much greater focus on equity. So, if you look at healthcare, unfortunately, it's very incentive-driven. So the wealthy, the well-to-do are much better catered to than the poorest and most vulnerable. But as health professionals, I think we're going to be increasingly challenged to be able to find ways of better addressing the needs of the most marginalized, the most vulnerable, the ones with the least resources. So how you can do that within your setting will be something we need to be able to work at better and better. And data and evidence is key. If you're working in a pharmacy setting, whether it's hospital, community, or research, the data that you have, how that informs your continuous adaptation, evolution, new models of services is going to be critical. So I would encourage all of you to look at that, to look at how you can use quality improvement or other tools, implementation science tools, in your day-to-day practice, because I think that's going to give you an edge, which will be important.
Thank you for your answer. We have a few more questions. So, having in mind the rapid technological innovations in artificial intelligence and automatic dispensing system, how can pharmacists diverge their skills to be still competitive in community pharmacy field?
Yes, and this speaks to exactly what I was saying earlier about not being too wedded to the models of the past. So it's very clear that anything that a robot can do or an algorithm can do better than humans, you can guarantee that in the future, those roles, or the majority of time spent on those kind of tasks, there won't be a demand for that anymore, because robots will be faster, cheaper, maybe safer than the way it's being done manually now. So if you think about the core purpose of the profession is bringing value to patients in terms of how they're using medicines to optimize their health and well-being, then you can look at totally different ways of achieving that. The other thing that's important about community pharmacy is the first word. You're based in the community. So you can be agents of community change, looking at broader public health issues, being a center of information, being a center of collaboration between different sectors, different professionals coming together, looking at how to support patients with their medicines and with their public health going forward. I think the advantage of community pharmacy in many countries is that it's so accessible. So use that as an advantage and a trajectory for something totally different. I think there are some fascinating models already that are being used, which could be expanded. So I'm sure you're familiar with many of these. It's actually, interestingly, when I was in IPSF, we started this pilot project with colleagues in India to look at how community retail pharmacies in India could become centers for DOTS, or direct observed therapy in TB, for TB patients who otherwise would have to go to the hospital, would have to queue, and so on. So, this was community pharmacies in India for the first time playing a very public health role, which they found, had a positive impact on the community pharmacy business as well, because there's now clientele who are coming to the pharmacy for all sorts of other needs as well. The other thing that I think is really exciting potentially for the future role of community pharmacies is to have a much stronger impact, responsibility on data and evidence. If you look at the way big data is evolving, being able to use that at the community level to look at what's the community profile of health and wellness and disease and so on, and how can that be managed. I mean, pharmacists have great training in understanding data, evidence, technology, science, evidence-based medicine. Why not use that to have a bigger impact on the communities that you're working with as well?
Thank you very much for your answer. And we have one more question. It is, how do you imagine that in countries like Malawi, where I'm coming from, I can really improve in healthcare? I feel like a newly graduated pharmacist. I can see so many issues in pharmacy practice that I personally feel are not ideal.
Okay, so maybe just to clarify that question, you're saying, what role can you play when there's so many big challenges to be tackled? Like, where do you start? Is that what you're sort of asking, if I understand correctly?
Yeah, I believe that was the main point of our questionnaire. Yeah, he's saying yes.
Okay, so there will always be huge numbers of challenges and opportunities, but also when you've got, in the Malawi setting, and I've been very lucky to be in Malawi myself, and also had really good interactions with the former dean of the pharmacy school there. Because there's so few of you, every single one of you will have a much bigger impact on medicines access, on health, than an additional pharmacist in Canada, say, because every single one of you, what you do counts. So that means that relatively you can actually have a huge impact as a new pharmacist than perhaps many other countries, which is a great opportunity. So where to work, what to work in, I think first of all be guided by what you're inspired by. So I would challenge you to think about the different issues that you're confronted with and what you think is most important. And then, use that to discuss with other colleagues what role you can have. In a country with so few pharmacists, I think many pharmacists have a bigger impact by working at sort of the macro level. So at a national level, looking at new models if you're doing research or sort of more practice-focused things, policy changes, trying to understand the biggest challenges around access to medicines and how to address them. Also, when you're only a small number of professionals, any role that you can have expanding the number of professionals and expanding the number of workers will have a multiplier effect. So that means that you can be an agent of expanding the workforce to have an even bigger impact in the future. So becoming a teacher, practitioner, or training technicians, for example, and that way you can really amplify what you're trying to achieve. There's some great work done in Malawi looking at the different access to medicines challenges, and be audacious, be bold, talk to your Ministry of Health people and see what they're trying to work on, and they're, I'm sure, willing to take on young, bright, inspired, hardworking people to work on this. It reminds me of a colleague of mine from IPSF days who was the president of the Pharmacy Students Federation in Zimbabwe, and actually now he's a colleague at WHO. He just joined WHO headquarters a couple of weeks ago. But we were students and we were having these sort of similar conversations, and he was passionate about regulation and quality of medicines, and he then went on to take a very senior role in the Zimbabwean regulatory body, and then also did a PhD, and then from the work that he was able to achieve in Zimbabwe, able to advise other countries like Afghanistan and other countries who are trying to also strengthen regulations. So whatever you're able to do with very limited resources, very few people, is going to be important learning and evidence that can also have an effect in other countries too. So I think you have a huge opportunity at your feet, and find somewhere to start and keep going.
Thank you for your answer. And now just last question of the night. So at the end, as we are celebrating women and girls in science, as a successful woman, say something inspiring and feel free to add any closing statement you want.
You're going to hear, as a woman, as a young woman, you're going to hear no a lot. And you're going to be judged on how you look, the fact that you're a woman, you're going to face discrimination, harassment, all kinds of things. And I would say, do not pay attention to this. Do not give them the opportunity to bring you down, to make you feel less than your worth, to make you feel that any of that matters as your ability to contribute professionally. We talk about the glass ceiling for a reason, and actually I'm part of a group here in Geneva called Women in Global Health. So looking at how to expand women leadership in global health. And we talk about the concrete ceiling because sometimes it's more than glass, it feels like concrete. So, you know, draw on your peer support. Don't take no for an answer. Keep fighting. You'll find other peers who support you, you know, build your social capital. So all these lessons that I'm talking about, you know, are important. And do it anyway, I would say, you know, whatever the challenge, find a way to do it anyway.
Thank you very much for your kind answer and your time you given to us and for your participation at these webinar sessions. And thank you all for your questions. We had a lot, but we are really out of time, so we can't keep asking more. So we will close this first webinar session right now. So thank you again for your participation as being the lecturer, and we will move forward to our next speaker.
Great, thanks, Dalia. And I just wanted to say, if anybody else wants to contact me, you have my, I'm on Twitter, so I'm happy to take any other questions and respond to them on Twitter as well. And thanks again. All the best. Take care. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.